Hello, Nabeel, and I see you are wearing the Super Sheeps shirt. I
That's
love
true,
that.
yeah. I don't know if you can get it all on camera, but yeah, just for the show, the Seattle Super Sheep.
No, dude, I love that so much. I just wanted to congratulate you again about yesterday. So yeah, I guess if you want to share a little bit about it, I would love to hear how the games went. I got like a little bit of updates from Ian, but not like a
Yeah.
whole lot. So
I mean, it was great. It was a smaller tournament. It was about 20 of us, I think, that played yesterday. And I say smaller because, OrcaCon, which you took in Seattle a couple of months back, that usually ends up being anywhere from like 40 to 60 people, which it was this year. OrcaCon, I think, had 20 people that had been to nationals this
yeah,
year.
yeah,
So you took down Goliath of a tournament, one of the probably toughest in the country, right?
yeah.
So in comparison, this one, I mean, you still, the Seattle community is so strong. You still had like six, seven people that had been to nationals. So, they're tight games for sure. But definitely different than a tourney that's going to have like a semifinal round and then kind of be a little bit more intense. So, personally, I enjoy that more. It's a lot more casual when you play with around 20 people than when you're trying to do a massive tournament that's
Oh,
40, 50
absolutely.
plus. I feel like you build the community a little bit more as well. No one's taking themselves as seriously, in a small group. You're just sort of having fun. So yeah, I mean, I couldn't have enjoyed it more. All props to Ian for kind of hosting in the PNW community now. Aside from a couple of the bigger ones like OrcaCon, he's putting on all the tournaments himself. So it's great to have somebody in our community that's doing that. Otherwise, we really wouldn't have as much opportunity to play, right?
Oh no, for sure. I'm kind of I'm jealous. You guys seemingly get like a tournament every month. I was just letting Ian know that for the first time here in Hawaii, we're actually having two this year. One of which I'm hosting, and another board game store called Other Realms is hosting one. But they're expecting 32 as well, I think.
I think that should be a lot of fun. Like I said, I almost enjoy the smaller ones more. They're really fun. The bigger ones are cool because you get a big variety of players up front.
Yeah.
You get to play with some people that are really going to challenge you because they may do things you're not used to, which is always cool. But typically, by the time like in OrcaCon, you whittle down to that semis or that final table, they're all goaded, right? They're all
Yeah.
really incredible players, and you're all just it really raises your game to play with those individuals.
Absolutely. But still, going 3-3 in the prelims is still impressive, that being said. There's not a whole lot of players that consistently win all the prelim games. Not even
You know
myself.
what's funny about that is that's sort of been my MO for a while.
Yeah.
I actually do really poorly at final tables historically if you look back over like 5 years, but I crush prelims somehow. It's weird. It's a I mean I have some
No,
theories as to why, but yeah, it's interesting.
for me, it's very similar. I'm sure, as you know, I come from mostly an online background, but I've made so many finals and semifinals to things, but I've actually won very few titles, and I feel like the pressure just gets to me at the end. Something that's probably in the headspace, right? Uh,
Could be. I think there's a lot to it. I actually think for me, my gameplay works a lot better in prelims where there's a little bit more variety.
yeah,
I tend to do a lot better when it's not all basically top tier players that are playing mathematically, right? I think when you're looking at most final tables, especially in the online community, everybody there is research, everybody is making the optimal move at every given time. Table talk has a more limited impact, right? When you think
absolutely.
about the prelims, table talk is huge. Table talk is,
For sure.
80% of my game, right? And I think you've experienced that when you've
Oh,
played with me as
definitely.
well.
Yeah.
So I think that works way more effectively in terms of my game. The prelims, the talking works way better in those prelims than it does in the finals, right? So in the finals, I tend to typically get a little bit of a drop off because no one's listening to me, right? No
No,
one,
right.
no one wants to listen to
Correct.
me or anybody else.
They're listening
Everyone's
to
just playing their
themselves.
game. Yeah,
I
you
think
have
that's
to.
where I tend to suffer too. I don't know if I shared this with you, but one of the strategies I went in going to nationals this last year was just being too honest and too transparent. And that
Mm,
worked all the way until the final table, where it was
yeah,
like, I don't even need to show my cards because everybody already knows what I have.
yeah.
It's like I'm sitting here as the underdog with these three like goats, you know?
Yeah, no, it can definitely feel that way. And I mean, that nationals table you had last year, those were some of the best players in the world,
No,
right?
for
So,
sure.
and yourself included. So that's tough competition.
Tell me how the final game went. I'm very curious. I was looking at the standings. I was like updating it every hour, but I saw that you won all the prelims, and then of course winning the finals is really what it's all about.
I don't think we have the table pictures or the boards
Yeah,
right now. We'll probably get them. Thinking back, it was I going in as the top seed, right? I got to pick when I wanted to go,
yeah,
and that's another area to your point earlier where the pressure can get to you. That happened to me in semis and nationals the year prior, where I just completely botched my placements as the top seed at the table. I just overthought it too much, went for some crazy strategy I didn't need to do, and just
yeah.
got dominated. It was probably one of my worst games I've ever played competitively. I take that lesson though from a couple years back into future games now, and I'm just like, I got to play my fundamentals. I got to play my fundamentals and look at the board and really decide like what is scarce. What do I need to do to sort of start out strong,
Yeah.
right? And for me, I always want to make sure I'm not going to get locked out of wheat. That's really important early on. I look at
Absolutely.
the board. And it was one of those boards where wheat was going to be a little bit tight. In fact, player four did get locked out of wheat playing the whole game. And part of why I got locked out of wheat, though, was because I told him to settle somewhere else so
Right.
that he wouldn't
No, no,
take
no,
that
for
wheat.
sure. Where did you end up placing? Was it first, second?
So I ended up choosing third.
Okay.
It's funny. It hasn't even been 24 hours. I'm thinking back and I'm like, man, I should have gone second
Yeah.
because if player two knew what he was doing, he would have blocked me out of wheat pretty early.
Right.
Um, because there were only two really strong wheat spots. I went third because it was a strong ore game. There were a couple really powerful corner ores. I think it was an 8 ore and a 6 ore on each side, and there was
Okay.
still another 10 ore on the board there. So I felt like with those three strong ores, just really two playable wheats, one of which was just a 10. It was an 8 and a 10 wheat really that were playable. It didn't feel like there was going to be a lot more, on the board. So I decided to go third because I felt like between three good ore spots and two wheats, I felt pretty good on the board. There wasn't an obvious first that was like, oh, you got to go there, which one of the games we had yesterday, there was an obvious first, and
Like a
whoever went first,
659 or like a 8-5-10.
it was something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, with
yeah.
like an or wheat combo. It was broken, right? I think it was exactly like that, like a 659 with or wheat brick. It was
Right.
just absolutely
You
broken,
have to
right? Nothing
take
you
it.
can do about it. Not something I would expect to see in like a nationals, but like when you're playing in some of these house games or tournaments, you'll see a broken setup like that, and if you get it, you get it. There's not much you can do.
And to that point, I prefer playing third most of the time if I can, or fourth even. But with first and second, I believe Rayman or some other online player posted that first and second win far more statistically than third and fourth. And a part of it is because of the ore and wheat. Like typically, if it's one good ore spot, first pick just grabs it and everybody else is fighting for it. But with, like you said, like maybe a higher ore board, I feel like third and maybe even sometimes fourth has their own strength and their own merit too.
I think you're absolutely right. I think a higher ore board, I typically don't go first.
Yeah.
The only reason I would choose to go first in a higher ore board is if it was a single strong brick paired with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. If it's like a corner brick, there's no other brick out there. Four brick combo up front, pretty rare resources. I might consider that. Otherwise, yeah, I with a strong ore board, I like going third or fourth, definitely. But again, today I already regretted it. I won the
Yeah.
game. I feel good about it, but I already regretted it because I thought back and I was like, "Holy crap!" If the guy went, so the 8 wheat went first, kind of
Yeah.
obvious, like that's only good wheat. If the guy who went second took the or wheat combo that I ended up starting with that third, I probably get locked out of wheat instead of him.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So it was one of those situations where thinking back, I'm like, man, if he had made that other decision, I think it was if I remember correctly, it was something like a 6 or 10 wheat and a like three something not useful basically,
Yeah.
and on the other side it was 8 or 4 brick 3 wood, something like that. So the or brick wood combo I think looks enticing to a lot of players. You
Yeah.
think you can probably get wheat coming back. in my opinion, ends up being a trap typically.
Epic,
Because
yeah.
you're not playing road, you're not really playing for the cities. You're gonna get stuck in a lot of those situations. So I would have ended up having to play that instead if second took that position. So
Yeah.
it's you never know what the other players are gonna do.
If you end up getting a table that's not really loose with trading, like not making wheat or making very poor wheat is probably the worst decision you can make.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he had a great port, but
yeah.
it doesn't matter if I don't know. I think at a tough table with no wheat, you're in trouble. That's probably the first thing I look out for, whenever I can.
I tell people that ports are great because they give you, more options, but depending on a port, which is kind of like what seemingly a lot of people think is the strategy, is not the way to go because you're using two cards to make one. It's generally inefficient rather than getting 1-to-1 or even 1-to-2 trades sometimes from an opponent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
I think that happened in that I think in the third game yesterday, a gal had 899 wood with the
yeah,
wood port, but she only had three total resources.
right,
So she of course built her five settlements quickly, had a nice long road, couldn't get or wheat right to
right,
city up basically, and just completely stuck.
yeah.
And of course, the entire table targeted her because up front you're building like
Oh,
crazy. You have that
absolutely.
fort. Yeah, and you just
It's
got destroyed in the end after being targeted for 70% of the game.
Yeah. Pacing is so important too. And when you take a strong wood brick setup, you're gonna struggle to city unless you get somebody that's just handing you wheats and ores like wild. And it's the opposite, right? With ore wheat sheep, it takes time to build the engine, but typically in the end game they just kill you. It's kind of interesting if you look back. I believe the three last U.S. Champions all placed first pick, and think
Interesting.
I think so, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Bo, Griff, and Drew all in first. I don't know. I think with a stronger board, getting the best spot matters more in a lot of cases. Whether that's production, resource rarity, there's a lot of
I
factors.
do think I saw the data you're talking about in terms of first and second typically being better. I do think there's a lot to that, unless it's a very specific board where you think you can get away with third or fourth, right? I think if you have that strong board like we were talking about, you can get away with it. But yeah, I typically am not upset if I'm going first. I'm really not. But again, there was also a board yesterday, I think my third game I'm remembering back to, where I was given third, and I thought it was the worst position I could have possibly had,
Yeah.
given third. The only reason that worked is because of what we were just talking about. We were able to target somebody else. And when you're targeting somebody else, you take all that pressure off of you. The game goes a little bit longer. You can come back with a poorer
Oh,
setup, right? You
absolutely. That's my I joke and say that's my strategy or my mindset that I try to go with is how do I extend this game as long as I possibly can? Which
yeah.
it ties a couple of positive attributes to it depending on how you look at it. One of which is I'm trying to give everybody a chance to play the game and make sure that everybody can try to win. At least I don't have fun just dominating a table or just winning with 10 points instantly.
Yeah, you want people engaged. I think that's no question. I think especially going back to the
Yeah.
conversation earlier on prelims, like you're building that community when you're in those prelim rounds, and you want everybody to have fun. You want everybody to respect you and respect each other, and really enjoy what they're doing, so they come back. I think that's good for the game overall. I think when we're talking about a final table, you almost don't want to start out that strong. I think I've made this mistake, plenty of times where you're the target off the bat because in those
Yeah.
final tables where everybody is going to work together to a common goal, you will get targeted pretty hard early on. It's not fun. It really it crushes your game long term, and it's the least fun game to play when it feels like a 3v1
Oh,
for
and it can be a lot of the times. And I feel like there's almost merit or maybe even an advantage to taking a setup that's weak enough to fly under the radar but strong enough to win.
those games where you have a really strong setup. The seven plays such a disproportionate effect on the game. I
Absolutely.
hate it. Right? It really does. I mean, I can think back to games where I had the perfect setup and an unblockable corner wheat or something like that. Somebody blocks it and then it doesn't move for 50% of the game,
Yep.
and you're just stuck. You can't do anything at that point, right? With your Uber setup because you've been blocked so much and the sevens just aren't coming through. Same thing with dev card distribution. Whether you don't draw enough knights to be able to control the block and the robber a little bit, or you draw so many, which is typically where I've lost my games, where I buy so many devs and end up not getting VPs, and I lose that game, right? So that's what makes Catan fun. There's all these variables, even if you play the perfect setup versus you don't, there's advantages and disadvantages to both.
Sure. I was actually going to ask you about that. I was like kind of messaging some of my friends, and I'm very outspokenly against development cards as a main strategy. Personally, I recognize that it is the strongest strategy and the most used strategy to win, but I was looking back at the games that I won, and I don't think I buy more than an average of like 4 or 5 cards per game, which I think is surprising to a lot of people, but I don't like the fact that there's a strong, what I feel to be like a little bit chaotic. You don't know what's coming out of it, so you're almost adding a luck factor to your own game. Whereas I guess control is the right word. Even though you pull obviously mono VP, it's way better. If you pull the wrong card in the wrong order, that's it.
So you couldn't be talking to a more opposite player, because I buy too many development cards, and I couldn't agree more. It is, I would use the word gambling. I think it's gambling when you're doing it, right? Especially when you do it the way I do, which is you'll see me in many games, including my semis from Nationals last year where I lost to Drew. I think I was at like 12. I think, the number was up there. I was at 12 and I didn't draw a single victory point. I kept trying to fish, get that one VP. And at a certain point, to what you just said, man, I would have been better off just building production at that point. Some of the worst games I've had, it's because I drew, 10 knights. I drew 8 knights, and there's nothing you can do at that point. Technically, you put yourself in that situation. However, statistically, you should never draw 10 knights in a game. So what's the right and wrong there? Is it what you're talking about is, hey, Nabeel, avoid the chaos, go get a couple, see what the table is doing, and then build your production? Or like, no, statistically speaking, dev cards are going to work in your favor more often and you'll win more games. Hey,
that's part of the, I guess, the risk reward, right? Whoever draws the Monopoly or VPs are getting way better value for their cards. But if you're drawing knights and you have no shot at army, you draw road builder when you already have 5 settlements, it could go either way.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think if you're first, if you are playing that dev card army game, and let's say you're at that 5 dev card limit and you haven't been able to pull a victory point, you're just pulling all knights, maybe a little bit of production. I think that's the point where you have to sit and think like, okay, what are the VP odds in this deck right now? To your point, are there 2 or 3 other players sitting there that have a VP in front of them? And if they do, you're simply not going to pull a VP.
Oh, absolutely. Right. There's some people that'll pull and be like, oh, this game sucks. I can't draw anything. I'm like, well, all 5 are already out, right? The odds are 0. So you're the one taking the cards.
But sometimes it's just, the luck's just not in your favor. Again, I reference back to that semifinal game with Drew, where he ended up winning the whole tournament, right? He played with you in that final game. He
8 and 10 VPs.
In my game, it was 6. He bought 6 development cards, 5 were victory points. And I bought 10, and none were victory points. So what do there are odds for a reason. There's the dice odds and there's the development card odds. I can't go back and say I would do anything different.
Yeah. No, it's so wild though, to your point, because if you count the cards that me and SonyBot put together, it's literally sub 1% odds that you don't get at least 1 VP.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing you can do. I've never been in a game where somebody, in person at least, I think maybe once online, where somebody bought 5 victory points.
I've only seen it happen like once.
Yeah, I think you could play a few thousand games and not get to that point. So, but so what do you do in that situation, right? I mean, do you change up the way your strategy, you go into the following games with a different strategy? I don't know. I feel like for me, Army and dev cards have gotten me to, a very consistent level of success. I win prelims a lot. I'm in a lot of final tables. There are games that I get in there and I can't pull a VP, or I don't get the night cards I needed, and that's it. That's the game for me,
Or Wheat Sheep I find to be a very strong individual level strategy. So when you go into a prelim game, if you're the most experienced player on the table in a prelim game, or wheat sheep is the way to go because you're already better than everyone else. So playing like a longest road game may or may not necessarily work in your favor depending on the production. But if you already know what you're blocking, what you're stealing, monopole, what the cards are, I feel like you win a lot more in prelims with or wheat sheep than you do in like a final or higher level game.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that to be true hearing it, but then I go back to the point that you made a little bit ago about the last three finals winners.
Yeah,
And I remember Bo, he started on that great ore spot a few years ago. Drew, he ended up winning with kind of he went first, and then he ended up with those two VPs that he had to have. At the end of the day, there is probability, right? So both sides are correct, depending on how many times you play and what that sample looks like.
yeah. I think one of the more important things, and you were briefly mentioning it earlier, is your production. Like, there's a lot of people that'll just pull too many cards before they get the initial production up. And if you don't get the Year of Plenty or the Monopoly card, you're just sitting there where everybody's making double your income, and you're just like, like, what am I doing?
That early city is very important. But also don't sleep on that player that has three production points and has four development cards in front of them.
For sure.
Those longer games, they tend to come back and do a really good job.
Drew says if you consider every down dev 1 point, because obviously, knights are worth less than one and monos are worth more than one, but if they average out to a point each, then you can kind of read the board a little bit better based on that.
Yeah, no, it's a good way to think about it. And again, everything communicates, right? Them not choosing to play that development card when they're blocked speaks strongly, but so does them tracking other people's cards so closely or asking what other people have in their hand. Like you have to track that stuff, right,
Yeah,
along the way.
absolutely. Like, a lot of people love tracking hands, and they can do it a lot better than I can. Like, sometimes, and it only works for over the board. Like, if I have a lot of cards in my hand, let's say I have 5 sheep, and I know that a lot of the other players already have sheep. Sometimes I'll just flip all 5 and say, hey, does anybody want sheep to trade? Then the next time the robber 7 comes up, you don't really have to extort, but you can be like, oh, you saw what I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think tracking is huge, honestly. I think, those that can do it effectively can really control the game. I can give you an example. I mean, there were times where I for sure was the block yesterday. I mean, I ended up going 4-0, right? So I was leading a lot of those games, and I could easily be like, well, actually, that guy just 3 for 1 for a wheat, and he's holding it in his hand, and I know you need that card, right?
Yep. Oh,
And
absolutely.
I'm not even in that conversation, but immediately then I'm no longer the steal. I may still be the block, but I'm no longer the steal. Or other situations where, especially if it's a newer player, I remember I was being solo blocked a lot yesterday on one of my ports at a sheep port, but there was a point where a 7 rolled, and immediately before anybody even saw the roll, I was like, I have no cards. I have
Yeah.
no cards. I want everyone to know I have no cards, because a newer player, when they were 3v1ing, immediately puts it back on that sheep port, right? So little things like that can definitely change the game in your favor if you're tracking properly.
Oh, I would say that the card steal is almost always more important than where the robber's being placed, because a lot of the times the robber moves. And like to your earlier point, sometimes it stays there for multiple orbits, but that's uncommon. Usually a 7 rolls like once per couple orbits, or a knight gets played. The steal can be way more crucial because, like you said, if you're missing a resource and you're spending 3, 4 cards to make one card and it gets robbed, you're just like, ah.
Yeah.
It especially matters for when you're playing like a wood brick setup and you see those players where they get their settles out and they're now like, oh shit, I need the city, and they're just porting their cards over and over. It's like, yeah, you gotta
Yeah.
hit them.
To be honest, though, when I'm playing wood brick, the players that do that early tend to win
Yeah,
the road setup and wood brick setup, right? If you wait until you have your 5 settlements to try and build the city,
not
and
happening.
everyone knows what you're doing, it's not happening, right? I saw multiple players yesterday make this mistake as they were the road player and they started buying devs because they felt, well, that's what I have in my hand. You should not do that. If you have a development card in your hand, but you're blocked on being able to settle further, or you can't move until you have that city, go ahead and hold. Go ahead and 4-1 until you can city 2 turns from now, instead of buying a dev when you're not the dev card player. You're not going to be the army player.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, you pull a VP, but the odds are probably pretty low of that.
No, people look at what their hand is on that turn, and that's it. You gotta. I feel like you have to at least look a full orbit, like in advance, or even 2 sometimes. Like, just because you have a road in your hand doesn't mean you have to drop a road. It's like,
That's just a question of win condition, right? If you
right,
know your win condition is road, you need to get a city somehow. You don't have
right.
access to those cards. Why would you buy a dev card? I mean, you got to be really desperate, or must be the end of the game where you're trying to just fish for that one VP. But if you're in that first half of the game and you're a road player and you need a city, you should be 4 for 1ing, 3 for 1ing, getting as many trades as you possibly can to give yourself those city cards. The last thing I do if I'm playing road is buy a dev card early.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
is pure.
yes. I feel like you need to get the city as your fourth or fifth point at the latest, typically. People
I would
that'll,
agree with
yeah.
that. Yeah,
But there's a lot of
yeah.
people that'll claim road when they don't need to. To me, road is claimed to either stop someone from winning or to win. I don't like taking it early because you get so much heat for it. But
No question.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you are always going to be the road player and everybody knows that, everyone's like, yeah, just build your 5, fine, no big deal. We know it's going to happen because you have no access to city cards,
right.
fine. I actually think it's good to do it because whether you know it or not, you may be preventing that person from winning, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There was a point yesterday where I did have a road. I just pulled a road. I was the army player, and I had just pulled the road builder. I already had army. I was going to double play like within 45 minutes of the game. I was going to
Yeah.
double play. If the other road player hadn't done the connect, I would have, road built settled and won the game very, very quickly. So I do think sometimes you're not thinking about that stuff. You're not thinking about the army player pulling a road building and, double playing, but that's always a possibility.
Oh, yeah. And that's what gives, or I guess that speaks to the strength of the dev card players. They have the option to play either way if they choose to.
That's
Mono.
you got to be smart in terms of what dev cards you drew,
Right.
right? And
Absolutely.
you got to pivot. Exactly. You got to pivot. I think the only time the dev card player really gets in trouble is when they just can't stop pulling knights,
Yeah.
which happens one out of every like 10 games or so. You're gonna end up just pulling so many knights you can't do anything with it. And it sucks. It's a bad feeling, but it's not going to happen most of the time. But once in a while, you're going to be in trouble with that play.
Yeah, there's some cases too where like I still consider two VPs to be a win condition in and of itself. Like you're pulling,
Mhm.
sometimes you get only VPs and you're like, "Oh shit, I don't need to pull anymore. I'm not getting army. Like what am I
Mhm.
fishing for?"
I
I
agree. I think
yeah,
the second VP changes things. I think both my third game and my fourth game yesterday, I had been playing for Army, but I ended up getting two VPs instead.
right.
I won both those games.
Yeah, and you can almost pivot it as like, "Hey, I'm not getting your army. I surrender. You can stop blocking me now." But a
Mhm.
lot of the times, like even if you're playing wood brick or wheat sheep, you have to get at least a city and a VP, no matter what. Like, or at least two cities. I call them ore points, but the reason I refer to that is because I try to take more wood brick setups. But it's like if I'm not getting at least two cities or a city and a VP, you basically can't win the game.
Yeah, if you're playing that wood brick setup, again, and going back to I think your point earlier, I think that fourth, even third, point that you put out there, if that's a city somehow because you're selling out for it,
Yeah.
especially if you think through most wood brick games, that brick is so valuable early on, right?
Oh
That
yeah, and
beginning of
it
the game,
loses value.
it loses value as the game goes, right? That depreciation. So if you think about it that way from turn one and you say, how do I turn this brick I'm going to produce into a city from the
Right.
very beginning of the game? You're not even thinking about that settle. You're just
Yeah.
like, exactly, how do I wheel and deal the brick I produce that no one else produces into a city instead of, oh, let me build some roads and settle. I think that's when the wood brick player, that's when the road player is going to have success. Obviously, if there's a great port for you, amazing. Use that port. But if not, that wheeling and dealing, even in a high level game, getting your wooden brick traded early as the road player is huge.
Yeah, I think it's quantity and efficiency, right? So wood brick players tend to make a lot of cards, but not the right type of cards. And then you have or wheat sheep who typically either gets a port or in wheat, which you need to win the game. So they may not be making the most cards, but they make up for it with building points a lot easier.
I know, in person and online can be different, right? If
Yeah,
you're an in person player and you're not a great trader,
yeah,
like you don't feel like you have the communication skills yet, you just haven't built them out, you're not a great trader. Playing road is hard
yeah. Oh,
because how
absolutely.
are you going to get those cards you need, right?
You can't.
Playing road. You can't, right? So vice versa, if you're a good communicator, if you consider yourself a good salesperson, a smooth talker, you can take that road strategy, get yourself some or wheat when people aren't, really paying attention and suddenly have some success. But you know what I noticed? I noticed the opposite with a lot of wood brick players. I noticed that they're quieter.
Yeah.
They take that less, less not gambling, right? Not gambling with the dev cards. They're taking that road strategy. They're like slowly building, and they inevitably end up with 7 points.
It's a
And
more cushy play style because typically when you're or wheat sheep, it's I'm throwing the robber on you with this knight, or I'm monopolying all your cards. Like you're the
yeah,
bad guy, right? Most of the time.
yeah. Yeah,
um,
exactly. I talk about it a lot. I almost never play road.
yeah.
I've played. I can count on on one hand the amount of times I've played road. Most of the times I did, it was very intentional, and I won that game because I saw a very specific setup. I saw I'm the only one that's going to be getting road. I see the ports. I see how to do it. We're going to do it. But I almost never play it. If you look back in my prelims, it's almost all largest army or fishing for the right devs.
No, for sure. My semifinal game from last year, I played or wheat sheep, and I could tell you because I was familiar with the player across from me from the online scene, he's a much better or wheat sheep player than I am. And what made it worse was that he played after me. I was third and he was fourth. So going, before the or wheat sheep player, you get the knight put right back on you. But what I feel like gave me the win there is because he was fourth pick, he only got to place on road resources, even though he played or wheat sheep. So the inefficiency there kind of hurt him, I guess. And otherwise, I feel like I would have been outclassed, basically. Um,
Yeah, I mean, if you have a win condition, right? And if
yeah.
your win condition is the same as somebody else's, and you think they have you outmatched, that's tough. Even thinking back to the finals game yesterday, I was playing Orweed Cheap, Ian was playing Orweed Cheap, but I had the 8 and he had a 10
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
you know, that's
Statistically, you're going to beat
where
him.
exactly statistically you're going to win that game. He had a paired 10, so it was a wheat or 10, but
Oh,
I shared the 10 wheat. So every time he paired it, I would still be getting the wheat, and then I had a stronger ore right on the other side. So I felt pretty good about it. What ended up really working though, more than anything else, I think in my favor in that game is there were enough sevens where I could keep the 10 ore blocked, which was shared with somebody else.
yeah, I was
So
going to say, I'm sure the other two players hit the 10 wheat a lot.
yeah, the 10 wheat was hit. I think probably halfway through that final game, everybody was like, oh wow, Nabeel's about to run away with this. And at that point, I think I was solo blocked on my ore pretty much the rest of the game. But
Oh,
I think it was too late.
yeah.
It was too late because I also pulled out a wood port with a
Yeah.
9 and a 4 wood. So it was almost the strongest ore wheat sheep with the wood port. Felt like a broken setup by the end.
There's only so much a 3v1 can do. If you have the production and you have the ports, bring it
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Even going third, being able to pull out a setup like that, I felt pretty good about it. I think,
Yeah.
but it wasn't one where because you're going third, the other players can't do a heck of a lot,
Yeah.
right? Because you're kind of controlling that setup. No one's gonna, take my wood port from me really at the beginning of the game. It just wasn't, juicy enough for them, and we were sharing the wheat, so it was a good setup. I think it was a hard one for me to lose. But going back to what I said at the beginning, going third, somebody had taken that spot second,
Yeah.
everything shifts, right? So at that point, I'm like, crap, I wish I had chosen to go earlier and, taken that setup, but, it ended up working out.
One thing I did want to ask you about, if you don't mind talking about it, was 2023 semifinals. There's like almost no information from like any of the other three tables out there, because I believe the top 16 from that year was predominantly people not from the online or like people on social media that were like talking about it, sharing pictures and stuff.
You're asking me about my past trauma right now, is what you're
Oh
doing.
no. Sure.
2023 semifinals. I mean, that was the worst game I think I ever played. I think it was like Zhao. I can't remember who was two. I think I was third. I think Dylan Delighted. I think he was fourth. I think that was kind of the
Oh,
order.
you were
So
seated with Zhao and Dylan?
no, I wasn't seated with them.
Oh, oh,
Excuse me. We
oh,
were
oh.
the seeds.
Oh,
One, two,
okay.
three,
I
four.
was
Yeah.
gonna
So we
say
were
that would
each
have
sort
been
of that.
that would
And
have been a
you know what
stacked
I
table.
remember about that table? I may be misremembering, but I remember all of the top seeds losing. It wasn't even just the top seeds. I think everybody in like the top seven, whoever had done well in the prelims, that got to pick their positions, we all screwed up.
Yep.
it was just one of those boards. You know what it was it was a very strong harbor game. The all of the top resources, like the eights, nines, sixes, everything was on the outer edges of the board, right? Which I think makes it really challenging to figure out the setups. Like if the middle of the board is going to be empty, kind of where are people going to go? So I played my worst game ever, but so did everybody else that you would have expected to do well, that you would have expected to win, right? I was actually just looking at that board. I've never played this in my life. I'll never play it again. I don't know why I chose to do it at my
You
first
did two
semifinal ever.
coasts, right?
I did
That's
two
the
coasts.
only bit of information that I heard.
I did two harbors. It was a paired nine or wheat. It was both were ports. So I had the ore port. It was a paired nine or wheat, and it was an eight sheep, and I had an eight, and I had the sheep port as well. So I had both the sheep port and the ore port. So I had the best ore wheat sheep, and it was an eight wood on the other end. So I had two numbers. I'm pretty sure I had nine and eight. I had two numbers, both harbors. I don't want to justify it because I don't think I would do it again. But if the
Yeah.
nine rolled maybe twice to start the game, or like in the first like few turns, I would have a couple cities there, right?
No, for sure. I was actually just trying to pull up because I have Best Coast Pairings Premium. I was trying to see who you played with in that game.
Oh, I remember that was Katie, who ended up
Right, she
going
ended up
winning the
winning,
game.
right? I wanted to share a funny, kind of not so funny memory. She walked out, and I'm like, "Oh, congrats!" Like, that was a tough table, and she's like, not really." And I was like, "Oh man."
Katie's one of the best, and I
Yeah,
think the other two players of that table, they've been to nationals a couple times, but I don't think
fair,
they've really been in that scene necessarily as much at all.
for sure.
But Katie, yeah, I mean, she had a great setup. I would say it was one where she should have been 3v1 earlier, and it didn't happen, right? But I also completely misplayed. So
Yeah.
again, it was, I knew it was a feast or famine going into it. If my numbers roll a couple times early on, then I can sort of build out, then I can city out, and I'm good. I think the nine rolled probably four times the whole game, and that was my
Absolutely.
paired number, right? So I don't know if it's as a result of that, but I do tend to focus on number distribution more than I've done previously in the past. In the past, I would say I was very into the paired resources, whether it's wood brick or an ore wheat. I don't tend to do that very much anymore. Especially, I think in top play, you will have one of those pairs blocked, and then suddenly it's no longer as valuable as it was. Similar to what I was just describing.
You probably don't remember this, and I also don't remember it quite well, but when I was checking back to BCP, you actually beat me in my first ever official tournament that I played in. It was round two in Seattle, I think in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. But I distinctly remember you placing on doubled eights, and they just kept rolling and rolling, and I was like, oh man. I was writing down the numbers too, I think, at the time, and I was just like, I give up. I stopped writing it halfway into it.
You
But
know what's funny about that tournament?
yeah,
That's also the tournament I met Sunny.
really,
And I
yeah,
so both that OrcaCon, I met you and I met Sunny. I beat you both in qualifiers to
you
make the
did,
final table.
you did.
I don't think I won the finals, but I beat you both.
I think I have it
So
on
the
record.
next year I played Sunny in the finals, and that was also, I think I almost stopped playing after that game. After I played Sunny in the finals at OrcaCon the following year, because they were that year I had already been to nationals, I think twice,
You,
and so there wasn't, the Seattle community hadn't been built yet. We didn't have all these good players in Seattle. I was sort of the only one that had like consistently done a good job. We had maybe one or two guys like Steven Ip, for example. He crushes it. But that final table, I was the only person that was known. So as it happens, right, I was targeted that entire game. I was solo blocked that entire game to a point where I didn't want to play. I don't think I went back for another year because it just felt so defeating, having been targeted like that. But Sunny came back and won that game. And it was the prior year. I remember I beat him in a prelims, and I want to say it was the same year I played against you as well. But
they unfortunately didn't publish finals, but it says that you and Sunny in 2022 went 3-0 in prelims.
yeah,
So you were
yep.
the two
So
players that went 3-0.
yep, and I played him the year prior and beat him. He came back with a vengeance. I
Yeah,
remember that. He came back with a
absolutely.
vengeance, and he solo blocked me, but it was also the seven just didn't roll. So after the solo block happened, the robber just stayed there for a very, very long time. And there was another player at that table who I had played with previously, so he sort of knew my aptitude, and the both of them just decided like, yep, we're Nabeel's not going to win. I think at some point in the game, Sonny even said, I may lose this game, Nabeel, but you're not going to win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's that feeling where you're just like, okay, I can't do anything.
Yeah.
I can place as well as I can place. I think I even had the board, and I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I would do that 10 more times. But there's just nothing you can do in a situation like that when you're targeted.
Me and Logan were joking around that the reason I flew up to Washington this year was to beat Sunnying and get my revenge, as they call it, right? But
I can't beat him anymore. There's one if there's one player that consistently beats me, and I every time I talk to the guy, I'm like, yeah, you're a better player than me. I can
oh,
see it
I
the
agree
way
on my end too. Yeah.
he is incredible. He just the way he sees the board. Um, I've learned a lot from him, even in terms of placements and especially that first settle you're going to build, right? I think he is really good at understanding like building to a spot as
Sure.
opposed to starting with the resources you need. I think he sees ahead of a lot of players. So I mean, all the respect in the world for him. I meet him that first year, haven't touched him since. I really have not, haven't been close.
I actually heard, I'm not too sure if he's going to be playing in another qualifier, but I know that you just qualified, obviously. Ian is
Yeah.
still trying to get his ticket. Logan's going to keep swinging until he hits it.
We'll see. I mean, depends on how many more qualifiers we can kind of get in the area. But yeah, it's getting tight. It's already, it's March here. I don't know how many more qualifiers we're gonna end up having in the area. So I'm not sure. I think we all have busy schedules right now.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it closes out in August, so if anything, there might be only a chance for a couple of more, if that. And like you said, it
Yeah.
depends on who's willing to host.
This area is tough. There's just so many good players, especially when somebody like you flies out
Oh, dude,
and
I
takes.
I didn't expect it to be 40 people. But the reason I flew is because me and Logan are such good friends that he's like, you don't have to rent, or stay at a hotel. Just come. It's the shortest flight from Hawaii. So I'm like, shoot, it's the least expensive, and I get to hang out with my buddy.
No, you did great. Obviously, that from that table, right? It was Sunny, Andy, and Doug, I believe, and Andy and Doug have already qualified.
Yeah.
So we have three nationals players in there, and obviously, I mean, Sunny might be the best in the whole group. So whether he qualifies or not, right? That was a killer table you
I
won.
didn't actually. Andy qualified. When was that?
Andy qualified like the week after,
Oh wow.
or yeah, there was a quick turn
Oh
tournament that he
wait,
took.
hello. I think I shouted him out. Oh no, that was the same tournament where it was Steven, Andy, and Doug in the same finals, right? I
Yep,
think they
I
had
believe so. Yeah.
Ollie. Trying to remember the last name, but he was the fourth player. Yeah, no, I
Mhm.
shouted that out. Shoot. So, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll all see each other again, I think, at
No,
nationals.
no. I'm gonna hide my face now. Oh, shoot. That's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, there's good odds that we're gonna be paired against each other too, or at least
Mhm.
somebody is.
Yeah. Look, at that point with nationals, for me, everybody is good. Everybody is good, and I feel like there is a lot of luck involved at that level. Even more so than the earlier games. Like I think when you're playing a home qualifier, the skill difference is a lot higher because you get some people that maybe have never played in a tournament before, and you can outplay them, no question. I think that's really hard to do at nationals,
Yeah.
and I think that's proven when you get somebody like Bo who won 3 years ago and then didn't qualify the next year for semis, like he didn't win a game, right? I think it just shows like that he's one of the best players in the world and he didn't win a game or didn't make it to semis. So it's tough. There's a lot of luck involved when you get to nationals.
It's so hard with such a small sample size, and it's hard to address this issue too. But who you play against, I feel like matters more than the luck
Mm.
of the dice per se. I
Yeah.
was very fortunate to not be paired with anybody that I knew, and I probably knew like close to a third of the players at nationals last year.
Yeah.
Like whether that was playing almost daily online or just knowing their reputation. Like I basically got zero online players all four games.
Yeah. I would say actually I'm in the same boat. If I play with people that I don't know, I do tend to do a lot better.
Yeah,
If I play with people that again they know my strategy or they see me as a threat, it's tough to pull those games out, right?
for sure. It's hard. Like I'm imagining like going into a table now where you know like maybe one or two people and the one or two people are new. It's like you there's that tense dynamic that's there that the other people don't really know about. So it's like how do you I guess address that to me it's almost like a bias even though you don't want that bias to be there. You can't deny that it exists in that way.
Yeah, you have to make logical arguments based on that specific game, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to point out, like, if you look at this specific resource, this number that's rolled, like, guys, we really got to turn it around and do X, Y, and Z. I think that's a big part of it. I think the thing that's made me, as consistently successful as I've been is being able to sort of out table talk the table talkers, right?
Right.
So if you have two strong table talkers at the game and you have maybe two newer people, which happens a lot at prelims, even in Seattle with such good players, you get new community members kind of coming in regularly, and you have a person, a guy or a girl trying to sort of run the table. You have to shut that down pretty quickly, and if you don't, then they're going to be taking sort of all the advantages trades and making sure that they're getting exactly the right blocks and the right situations. I think being able to shut down some of that talk is one of the things that's made me the most successful. I think I did that successfully in a game with you, but I remember specifically doing that really well with Andrew in New York. I remember because he's such a great table talker. He tends to control those games, but it's
Dude,
one of
that
those
same
things.
game that you're remembering was with Andrew
Yeah,
and me. I have
it
a
was with
clip of
Andrew and
it
you, and
too.
I remember doing it one other time. I remember as well because I have a tendency to be able to just undercut the table talkers a little bit. They start talking so much; they're the loudest person. I'm like, yeah, but X, Y, Z, and then suddenly the rest of the table's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't listen to Andrew pretty quickly, right? And I think you have to do that with some of the top players. Like somebody like a Dylan, Andrew, these guys come in and they're controlling everything. Suddenly you're not even playing your game, they're controlling the whole board and the whole table. So if you have somebody else that can sort of counter that a little bit, I think it works really effectively to balance the game out.
Little fun statistic. I don't know if you knew about it, but Steph shared something that I found interesting was that players that win more statistically take less time on their own turns, and people that are less, less vocal, more quiet, they take longer turns. So
Hmm.
I thought that was interesting because the data that she used, or at least that she shared, was for semis and finals of last year, where it seems like players that are very vocal they'll scream and talk to the person on their own turn, but when it comes to, their turn, they'll try to like sweep under the radar and just move along quickly, trying to, I guess, avoid the attention or avoid the arguments from happening. But
Yeah, I think that's fair. I feel like that's probably pretty true for my play. My turns, I feel like I'm very fast.
yeah.
But especially if two other people are trying to make a trade, you're always going to hear from me. If there's two other people trying to make a trade, you will always hear from me in a positive or a negative.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because at the end of the day, every trade that's done helps both players. One, it could help way more than the other, but you're not involved, right? So,
Right.
was there, I guess, any other things you wanted to talk about? I know we kind of went over a few different subjects.
I'm really glad the community is growing as much as it is. I think every year at nationals we tend to have more players than we did the year before. It's
Oh, yeah.
really grown.
We're probably going to get
Uh,
close to 150 this year, I think.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that'd be incredible, right? I don't know how you cut that 150 down to a 16 for the next day. That is a brutal cut.
I had the idea of what if we do three prelim games on day one, and everybody that doesn't win at least one game gets eliminated because you would instead have a top 48 that moves into day two. Day two, you have the fourth prelim game and then top 16 as regular. But you're basically removing one game from day one and letting everybody go home early that knows they're not going to make it. And then in the top cut, you only have people that have one win high points or two or three wins, which at that point, everybody can make top 16 if you have at least two wins. My biggest pain point, and I've told this story a million times, was going into round four with Sunny. Two of the players sitting across from us were 0-3. Me and Sunny were 2-3, right? And the first thing they say is, we got no chance. We don't care who wins. So I'm sitting there panicking like, this is not even a real game anymore. And he ended up taking a 6-2 trade or something on his last turn, which I don't fault him, right? You're there to win the game. But at that turn, at that time, I was really pissed off. Like, why are you here? Why are you just king making somebody intentionally?
Yeah.
I
No, I
digress.
think that's fair. I think once you're past like 120 players or something like that, going straight to 16 does feel short. So I think what you just described in theory would work really well. I think whether you're cutting it down to everybody that hasn't won a game, or maybe there's just a top 48 that you go into for day two, I think it would make it a lot more enjoyable too for the greater community, because then they can feel like they're participating on day two, instead of really dialing it down to such a small group. Because it's a big trip for 150 people to make annually. And if you're only getting to play for one day, I think that could be a little disappointing. So I think just the ability to like give 48 players the ability to play that second day, I think that's really cool. I think that's good for the community.
If they didn't want to do that implementation, I'm sure there's a system out there that exists to, at some point, whether it's round 3, round 4, to only pair winners with winners. But to Steph's point, then it almost maybe penalizes you for winning, because then your later 2 games, you only get harder opponents.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love pairing winners with winners just as a concept. I think there's
Yeah.
multiple reasons for that, but I do think the idea of adding an extra round before the 16, that's something I'm very for.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, whether it's a fifth round, fourth round, something. Like you said, everybody's flying out or traveling and taking a whole week off for this thing. Like, it would suck to be eliminated in one day. But I also feel like 8 hours of Catan in one day is a lot, and that's coming from someone with thousands of hours. Like,
8 hours. I mean, if we could figure out a way to do 3 games max in a day, I would be very happy. I think that fourth
yeah.
game is tiring. I think you end up with a lot of people that feel the way you just felt, which is, why would I even care? I have lost my first 3 games already. Why am I even caring about that
Or
last
on the
game?
opposite side, you're like sweating and like, I need to win. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So, I mean, I got to play in Masters this last year for the first time, so I got an extra day of like, oh, this trip is worth it.
yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, I probably would have been pretty disappointed if I went in for a day and didn't make it to that semis.
Cool, man. Well, hey, I think that pretty much covers most of what I wanted to talk about.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, this was great. And the thing I'm most passionate about is kind of building out that community, right? So, I think anytime we can kind of get more players involved in the game and teach them the best strategies so they win and they want to play more, right? I think that's really important. So
Sure.
I'm really happy that you're continuing to put content out so that we can teach the newer players and get more people involved. I think that's awesome.
Absolutely. And you and Ian, like I said, are doing such a great job up there. I don't think there's any other hosts like that put as much effort into, building a community and the involvement that you guys have. I think Andrew is probably the most comparable in New York.
Between Ian and Andrew, I think they're probably running the most tournaments in the country right now. So it's so easy to do, and I think the Catan Studios folks makes it easy to do. I would encourage anybody, if you're in a city and you wish you had a few more tournaments, reach out to Steph, reach out to the community organizers. I think they make it really easy,
They do.
to host. Yeah,
I'm hosting one here in May, so it'll be hopefully a lot of
there you go.
fun.
Yeah,
Cool, man. Well, hey, thank you very much for your time, man. I appreciate it.
yeah, awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Nabil.